The morning sun crept over the horizon, casting golden streaks across the road as Ray and the group gathered their belongings and stepped out of the inn. The air smelled of dew and damp soil, fresh and misleadingly peaceful, and looked mildly disappointed. Nothing of note had happened during their stay, but true to his word, Wilfred had already posted the A-class quest at the guild hall. Ray couldn't help but wonder what a shadow beast truly looked like, though a part of him doubted they'd encounter one here. It was more likely that a strong magical beast was stirring up trouble, nothing beyond the capabilities of a knightly escort. The carriages rolled on, horses trotting steadily down the forest path until Wilfred, ever watchful, narrowed his eyes. "We're being followed," he said calmly. "Drop bears. I can't say how many or what kind." Ray sat up straighter, his pulse quickening. Drop bears. Magical beasts infamous for their ambush tactics. Each one had pointed ears, lean muscle packed onto a frame the size of a large dog, and claws sharp enough to shred steel, each a foot long. But their strength? Equal to a full-grown grizzly. "How long have they been on us?" Delbert asked, already reaching for his sword. "Since we left the inn," Wilfred replied, voice even. Bernardo's eyes lit up, gripping his axe with an eager grin. "Looks like we're getting some action after all. Just hope there's no king among them," Wilfred muttered, resting a hand on the hilt of his sword. Ray tensed at that. A drop bear king was a tier above the norm, an advanced class beast, stronger and far more intelligent. He'd heard tales from his father, stories warning of how they tore through entire patrols. And yet, Wilfred had sensed them first, before Ray could pick up even a hint of danger. And he had dragon eyes. "Why didn't you tell us earlier?" Delbert asked, glancing into the surrounding foliage. "I didn't want the children to panic," Wilfred replied, his eyes briefly flicking to Ray and Gary. Then he turned to them, solemn. "Ray, Gary, arm yourselves. Prepare to fight. We might not be able to shield you this time. You're future knights of Avrion now. The only thing that matters is staying alive." Ray nodded, drawing his blade with a steady hand. Gary followed, but Ray noticed the tremble in his friend's fingers. The group pressed forward, each step heavier than the last. Ray activated his dragon eyes, his vision shifting, colors sharpening, shadows deepening. And then he saw them, at least 10 drop bears. Moving like ghosts between the trees, they vanished and reappeared, staying just beyond the group's line of sight. Then, up ahead, Ray spotted a narrow wooden bridge stretched overstream. "That's the bridge near Rennie Town's entrance," Bernardo pointed out. "They'll strike there," Delbert said grimly. "It's the perfect place for an ambush." As they neared, the horses suddenly balked, stomping and snorting. "They won't go any further," Delbert shouted, struggling to calm his mount. Ray peered toward the bridge again with dragon eyes and froze. A creature crouched beneath the structure, massive and oozing menace. Its body was at least 8 feet tall, covered in matted fur streaked with glowing violet lines. A dark purple aura pulsed from it like a living shadow. His breath caught in his throat. That wasn't just a drop bear king. It was a shadow beast, exactly like the aura his father once showed him. The knights dismounted, their instincts honed, weapons already drawn. Wilfred raised his massive greatsword. Delbert secured his shield and longsword, and Bernardo swung his axe onto his shoulder with a grunt. Ray opened his mouth to shout a warning, but it was already too late. The forest exploded. Drop bears launched themselves from the treetops like missiles. Ray reacted on instinct, barely raising his blade in time to block the swipe of deadly claws. The force knocked him backward, his boots skidding across the dirt. These creatures were stronger than the wolves from the Black Forest, but slower. He used that. Ducking beneath the second swipe, he drove his blade through its abdomen, slicing the beast clean in half. All around him, chaos reigned. The knights moved like a whirlwind, precision and power in every strike. Ray glimpsed each of them downing 2 drop bears with practiced ease. Then Gary. Ray turned to see his friend stagger, a deep gash bleeding down his shoulder. "Gary!" But another bear lunged, forcing Ray to defend again. Gary, despite the pain, grit his teeth and trapped the bear's claws between the hilt and guard of his sword. He slugged the creature with his free hand, sending it sprawling, then finished it off with a strike to the skull. He panted, blood dripping from his hand, his own and the beast's, his eyes wide and shaken. A scream tore through the air. 2 drop bears had breached the carriage, tearing into the workers inside. Ray broke into a sprint, but the knights surged past him. Wilfred, Delbert, and Bernardo struck with such overwhelming force that the beasts were torn apart in a single synchronized swing. Silence fell. Heavy. Electric. Ray began to lower his guard, but his instincts screamed. The bridge. They all turned as one. The shadow beast stood atop it now, its massive form silhouetted by morning light. Viscous black foam dripped from its jaws, and its fur crackled with arcs of violet lightning. A shadow beast. Bernardo breathed, voice barely a whisper. Wilfred stepped forward, gaze locked onto the monster. His voice rang out like a blade drawn in silence. Ray cast a sidelong glance at Gary. His friend stood rigid beside him, body trembling, lips pale. But what caught Ray off guard was the tremor in his own hands. He looked down. His sword, once steady, once an extension of his resolve, shook in his grasp. I'm scared. So this was what it meant to face a creature beyond your limits. Even if his spirit was willing, his body screamed otherwise. The monster before them exuded an overwhelming pressure, one that even the knights couldn't ignore. At the front, Wilfred, Delbert, and Bernardo held formation, weapons drawn and bodies tense. Ray and Gary were positioned behind them, shielding the carriage, though they all knew that in a real confrontation, it might not matter. And yet, the creature didn't move. It stood there, still as a statue, dark eyes scanning them like prey. Slowly, deliberately, it lifted a clawed hand and pointed at the knights. You will never defeat the shadow, it rasped, its voice like gravel scraping across stone. Soon, we will consume the land. The air turned brittle. Bernardo recoiled, jaw slack. It talked. Shock rippled through the group. Magical beasts didn't speak, at least not like this. Only dragons, high-tier spirits, or sentient humanoid creatures possessed the intellect for language. A drop bear speaking in perfect common was unheard of. Ray's mind raced. It's not just a beast, it's possessed. The shadow is using it as a vessel. The creature's gaze shifted past the knights, locking on Ray. You will fail, it continued coldly, and your loved ones will perish. And then, without warning, it launched itself high into the air, disappearing into the forest canopy with terrifying speed, leaving only silence in its wake. Bernardo lowered his axe slowly. Why did it let us go? Wilfred's brow furrowed. Because this wasn't an ambush. It was a message, a warning meant to shake us. They're playing a long game, Delbert added grimly. We're being worn down, mentally, emotionally. Or maybe, Gary offered weakly. It knew it couldn't win. Wilfred shook his head. No, a regular drop bear king, perhaps. But a shadow beast, that thing was far beyond our current strength. If we had engaged it, there would have been casualties. Gary swallowed hard, face pale. Bernardo leaned closer to Wilfred, voice hushed. It knew about our mission. Do you think there's a traitor at the academy? Wilfred didn't answer, but his eyes darkened. Delbert folded his arms with a frown. They've been tracking us since the inn. That adventurer attack? Probably staged. Everything's been leading up to this moment. He turned his gaze to Ray, eyes narrow. Bringing that red-haired boy, we should have known it'd bring misfortune. Ray's lips curled into a smirk. Huh, I thought you didn't believe in superstitions, Delbert. Or do you make exceptions when they fit your mood? Some night you are. Delbert stepped forward, tension rising, but Wilfred raised a hand to stop him. Enough, he said. Then, turning to Ray and Gary, he added, You both fought well. Better than most would under those circumstances. I'm proud of you. Ray glanced at Gary, his uniform stained with dark blood, hands still trembling. He nodded silently. Oomph, Delbert grunted. They were just basic tier beasts. When I was their age, I could have handled twice as many. Ray's mind pinged with a familiar message. Basic tier, crystal obtained, 1. Would you like to absorb? Yeah, though. He blinked. It had been a long time since he last saw a notification like that. During his early days in the Black Forest, he'd received 3 crystals, then nothing. Even after defeating dozens of beasts, including crazed monkeys, the system had remained silent. There's a limit, Ray realized. Each type of beast only rewards you once. He quietly chose no, storing the crystal for later. No one can know about this, whether it was a blessing or curse. He wasn't ready to find out if others shared this ability. If it was unique, he'd become a lab rat in no time. But even as that thought faded, another one took its place. Why did the shadow beast look at me like that? Did it sense something? Was it connected to the knight's secret mission? Before they resumed travel, Wilfred pulled Ray and Gary aside. "You must swear," he said quietly, "never to speak of what happened. Not the beast, not its words, to anyone." He didn't offer an explanation. He didn't need to. His tone made it clear this was no request. They nodded, and with that, the group set off again. Hours passed in silence. By mid-afternoon, Rennie Town emerged on the horizon. Tall, reinforced walls loomed above the road. Stone ramparts etched with ancient runes, 20 feet high, and lined with guards in polished armor. The gates were open, but only barely, just enough to let the carriages squeeze through one by one. Ray stared at the heavy defenses, impressed. Why all the security? Isn't this just a town? Wilfred rode beside him. Rennie isn't just any town. It's the foundation of Avrian's knighthood, the last frontier before chaos. Without it, the kingdom's defenses would crumble. "I thought we were far from the border," Ray said. "We are, but borders don't matter to some enemies." Wilfred's voice grew low. "It's not the shadow beasts we fear here. It's the Dark Guild." Gary's ears perked up. "I've heard of them. A rogue faction, right? Their leader used to be part of the Avrian Academy Council, until he was exiled." He flashed Ray a smug grin, clearly proud of his trivia. Ray snorted in amusement. "Why was he exiled?" Ray asked. Wilfred smiled faintly. "You'll learn soon enough. Your education starts here." He gestured toward the gate as it slowly opened to reveal the bustling streets within. "Welcome to Rennie Town," he said. "This will be your home for the next 10 years. Train hard. Grow stronger. Because this is where knights are made or broken."
Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
Rennie School was impressive, a testament to the wealth and effort poured into its construction. Though it lacked the grandeur of Roland Academy, it possessed its own charm. The school boasted top-of-the-line learning facilities and exceptional accommodations for students. The town itself was lively and bustling, with a surprisingly high population for its size. Its appeal stemmed from the unparalleled safety it offered. Unlike other towns that constantly feared attacks from magical beasts or the Dark Guild, Rennie Town was heavily guarded, making it one of the safest places to live. Despite these advantages, Ray's life over the last 10 years had been nothing short of miserable. When the knights left him and Gary in Rennie Town, the entire kingdom had gone into Amber Alert, a state of readiness for war. This was likely due to the shadow beast they had encountered. However, nothing had happened in the past decade. No attacks from the shadow beast, no movements from the Dark Guild. It was as if the world had been holding its breath. Due to the Amber Alert, students were placed under constant guard. A strict curfew was enforced, and leaving the town required special permission. Ray had originally planned to venture out and obtain beast crystals, but that plan had been quickly shut down. Unlike the other students, Ray was assigned a personal tutor who doubled as his guard, shadowing him at all times, except when he used the restroom. He initially thought this was standard, but after speaking with Gary, he learned that only a select few students receive this treatment. Already ostracized due to his red hair, Ray became even more of an outcast because of the special attention he received. The other students resented him, whispering behind his back. The only one who treated him normally was Gary, his sole companion over the years. Despite the isolation, Ray had gained valuable knowledge from his time at the school. First, he learned about Ki, a power that knights could cultivate despite lacking magical abilities. Ki allowed them to enhance their physical attributes, sharpen their senses, and perform feats beyond normal human capabilities. Mastering Ki even enabled some to slow the aging process, extending their lifespan for centuries. However, practicing Ki at too young an age could damage the body's internal organs. Because of this, formal Ki training only began at 15, a milestone Ray had just reached. The second and most fascinating subject was beast crystals. Unlike Ray initially believed, humans were well aware of their existence, and they played a crucial role in society. Knights used them to forge powerful weapons and armor, while mages incorporated them into enchantments, alchemy, and staff creation. Beast crystals were even used in technology. Extracting them from magical beasts required manual effort, and their power scaled with the tier of the beast they came from. The stronger the beast, the stronger the crystal, leading to superior equipment. The last and most perplexing discovery was about his past. Rennie's school taught about the Red Dragon's son, but only as a mythical figure tied to their divine being. According to legend, the divine being had defeated the Red Dragon's son, but was forced into an eternal slumber due to the immense cost of the battle. Though no longer present in a physical form, the divine being supposedly continued to issue commands to the kingdom, commands that everyone was expected to obey. The kingdom's devotion bordered on religious fanaticism. This devotion was also the root of the Dark Guild's formation. One of the kingdom's elders had refused an order from the divine being and was subsequently exiled. Since then, he had harbored a grudge, aiming to dismantle the kingdom. If Ray wanted answers about his past, he would need to confront the divine being directly. However, only individuals of the highest rank were granted an audience. Sneaking into the place to gather information had crossed his mind, but the obstacles were insurmountable. The divine being resided in Roland Academy, far from Rennie Town, and escaping his ever-watchful guard had proven impossible. Though he had learned much more over the years, these were the key points he had focused on. Now, at 15, he was finally free to leave this miserable existence behind. The kingdom had officially lifted the Amber Alert, likely because nothing had occurred in the last decade. With his impending transfer to Avrian Academy, Ray would soon have much more freedom. He packed his belongings from his dorm room and headed to the front of the school, where the knights were scheduled to escort them to Avrian Academy. About 50 students had gathered outside, a significantly smaller number than when they had first arrived. Back then, there had been nearly 100. Many had dropped out over the years, unable to bear the separation from their families. Spotting Gary, Ray joined him, the two of them chatting about the upcoming trials at Avrian Academy and what they were most looking forward to. Their conversation was interrupted by a familiar voice. "It's been a long time, you two." Wilfred stood before them. Ray had always liked Wilfred. The knight reminded him of his father in many ways. There was a calmness about Wilfred that made people trust him, as if everything would work out as long as he was there. Even after 10 years, his appearance hadn't changed, making it impossible for Ray to guess his true age. Thinking about his father, Ray found himself lost in thought. He hadn't seen him in over a decade and had no idea how he was doing. As if sensing his concerns, Wilfred placed a reassuring hand on Ray's shoulder. "Your father's condition hasn't worsened. Your mother is taking good care of him. I made sure to check with one of the knights before coming here," Wilfred said. A smile crept on Ray's face. "Thank you." Gary, who had been listening, spoke up. "How did you recognize us? We've changed a lot over these 10 years. Wilfred chuckled. "The blonde boy and the redhead who fought the drop bears? How could I forget something like that? I'm not that old yet." Gary smirked. "How old are you then?" He eyed Wilfred up and down, noting how the knight still looked the same as before. "Now that, my friend, is a secret," Wilfred replied with a grin. The three of them burst into laughter, a rare moment of ease. Around them, the other students began whispering among themselves. "Isn't that Master Wilfred? How are they on such good terms with him? They must be from a powerful family." Hearing the murmurs, Wilfred decided to take his leave. "I'll see you two later," he said before stepping away. Shortly after, a man who appeared only a few years older than them approached. He had a powerful build and wore the Avrian crest on his chest. Holding a sheet of parchment, he addressed the students in a commanding voice. "Future Avrian Academy students, I am Squire Master Lancy. From this moment forward, You must obey my commands at all times unless overruled by a higher-ranking officer. Our journey to Avrian Academy will take 7 days. Behind him, 5 carriages appeared, each large enough to hold about 10 students. The knights accompanying them traveled on horseback. There were 6 knights in total, including Master Wilfred. Squire Master Lancey was the second highest-ranking knight present, while the others were squires assigned to guard the carriages. Once everyone was ready, the convoy set off towards Avrian Academy. Ray felt a sense of excitement. He was finally leaving this place. He was also pleased to hear the journey would take 7 days. That meant more opportunities to obtain magical crystals. He had already absorbed the crystal from the drop bear, bringing his current points to 42. He still remembered the sensation, the tingling in his body, the immediate surge in strength. It was an addictive feeling, almost like a drug. Hours passed, and the sun eventually set. The group set up camp beside a forest, a relatively open area. The knights assured them there was little danger, as high-tier beasts were uncommon in this region. They would take turns keeping watch through the night. Each student was given a sleeping bag and a partner to share a tent with. Ray and Gary naturally paired up. In the middle of the night, when everyone was asleep, Ray quietly slipped out of the tent. Activating his Dragon Eyes skill, he ensured the guards were patrolling a different area. The enhanced vision made it easy to move undetected. He entered the forest, scanning for magical beasts he could take on. His Dragon Eyes detected a few basic tier creatures nearby. Lucky, he thought. This was the perfect chance to obtain more crystals. Approaching his first target, he crouched behind a bush, observing the creature. It was a fang boar, a powerful beast with massive tusks capable of tearing through bone. Unlike wolves, it lacked agility, and it wasn't as fast as drop bears. Ray stepped out from the bush, making himself visible. The boar immediately locked eyes with him, scraping its hoof against the ground as it prepared to charge. As the beast rushed forward, Ray waited until the last moment before leaping into the air, landing on its back. In one swift motion, he drove his sword behind its head. The boar collapsed instantly. He frowned when no notification appeared. Kneeling beside the creature, he used his blade to slice it open, searching for a crystal. To his surprise, he found one lodged inside the beast's body. Holding the crystal in his palm, he attempted to absorb it, but nothing happened. So, I can only absorb crystals granted by the system, he mused. Ray continued hunting through the forest, making sure not to stray too far from camp. After taking down 2 more fang boars, a notification finally appeared. Basic tier crystal obtained, 1. Would you like to absorb? Yes, no. For now, he stored the crystal away, deciding to test something first. Using his sword, he skinned open one of the boars again, searching for another crystal. But this time, he found nothing. So, when the system grants a crystal, it doesn't leave one inside the beast. Interesting. As he pondered this discovery, a loud, guttural snort came from behind him. Spinning around, Ray's eyes widened as he saw a fanged boar the size of a horse. An intermediate tier, if there were basic tier beasts in the area, there was always a good chance of encountering an intermediate tier beast as well. This was due to how evolution worked among magical beasts. They hunted and consumed the magical crystals of other beasts. Once a beast had devoured enough crystals, it would evolve to the next tier. When hunting the group of fang boars, Ray should have known there was a chance a stronger beast lurked nearby. He stood as still as possible, not moving a hair, waiting for the boar to act. When it charged at him, he managed to sidestep at the last second, the beast missing him by mere inches. But he was too slow like this. If he kept relying on basic dodging, he would eventually get hurt. Ray shifted into his beast form, gripping his sword in his mouth as he crouched low like a tiger. This time, when the beast charged, he ran straight at it. The boar snapped its massive fangs toward him, but Ray leaped onto a nearby tree, his fingers sinking an inch deep into the bark. His strength had improved dramatically after absorbing the crystals. He was not the same person he had been 10 years ago. The boar glared up at him, clearly frustrated. Lacking the ability to climb or fly, it resorted to the only option it had, It began slamming into the trees, shaking the ground with its immense strength. Ray quickly jumped from tree to tree as they crashed down behind him. The chase was beginning to exhaust him. He needed to act soon, or he would run out of stamina. Then he spotted an opportunity, a massive tree, twice the size of the others. He sprinted toward it, the boar recklessly following. When the beast rammed into it, the tree wobbled but didn't collapse. The impact stunned the boar, leaving it momentarily dazed. This was his chance. Ray sprinted down the tree, using his momentum to propel himself forward. With his blade clenched tightly in his jaws, he launched himself at the boar, slicing down from the tip of its head to the end of its tail in a single, fluid motion. Blood sprayed as the beast collapsed. He took a moment to catch his breath. The fight had been tougher than expected. He had deliberately avoided injury. If he returned to camp wounded, it would raise too many questions. Ray retrieved his sword and reflected on the battle. His beast form was excellent for speed and agility, but lacked the raw strength of his human form. He relied on momentum rather than raw power. It also sacrificed defense. Against humans, he would need to learn how to block and counter instead of dodging. If he could somehow merge his two fighting styles, he would become far deadlier. A slight disappointment nagged at him. The system hadn't granted him a message, which meant he hadn't absorbed the beast's crystal. He walked over and retrieved it manually, slipping it into a pouch around his waist. Even if he couldn't absorb it, the crystal could be used for crafting armor or weapons. Worst case, he could sell it. Deciding he'd had enough excitement for one night, Ray headed back to camp. Using dragon eyes, he timed his approach perfectly, sneaking past the guard patrol and slipping into his tent. Gary was still snoring loudly, completely unaware of Ray's absence. Ray struggled to sleep, his mind racing with questions. What would happen when he reached 100 points? His best guess was that upon reaching 100 points with basic tier crystals, he would unlock the ability to absorb intermediate tier crystals. But how could he test this theory? Then it hit him. There was something else that absorbed crystals, the black wolf cub he had acquired. In all this time, he had nearly forgotten about it. Closing his eyes, he focused, summoning an image of the cub in his mind. It hadn't grown at all in 10 years. Perhaps it would evolve if he started feeding it more crystals? A grin spread across Ray's face. He would continue hunting in the forest over the next few days. Any crystals he obtained would go to the wolf. Once it reached 100 points, he would have his answer. If he was going to use the cub more often, it needed a name. Would you like to name the black wolf cub? Yes, no. As usual, the system responded as soon as he had the thought. What would you like to name your pet? The wolf's black fur reminded him of a dragon he had once been close to, a dragon with deep black scales. Ray was certain the old friend would have approved of this choice. As soon as the sun began to rise, Squire Master Lancey woke everyone by banging 2 pots together. The ringing in Ray's ears was dreadful. Gary, on the other hand, slept like a baby until Ray kicked him in the stomach to stop his snoring. The students were required to pack everything away, the fire pit, the tents, and their provisions before loading them back into the carriages. 30 minutes later, they were on their way again. A couple of students in the carriage grumbled about the journey. Does Avrian Academy not have a teleporter? Why are we traveling by carriage? Yeah, Roland Academy has one, and Avrian is supposed to be on par with Roland. Yet, they can't even afford a teleporter. A girl sitting at the back of the carriage twitched in irritation, growing more and more annoyed at the conversation. Finally, she couldn't stand it any longer and stood up. Didn't you two learn anything? Avrian Academy is stationed at the front lines of the battlefield with the Shadow Plague. What would happen if war broke out and we lost Avrian? The two students stared at her blankly, failing to grasp her point. It would mean our enemies would have access to the teleporters, allowing them to travel anywhere in the kingdom. She sat back down, muttering to herself. Ray recognized her immediately, Slivia Hart. She had long silver hair reaching her waist, a symmetrical face, and a presence that demanded attention. By human standards, she would be considered beautiful. But that wasn't why he knew her. At Rennie Academy, term after term, the knowledge test rankings were posted, and every single time, Slivia's name was at the top. There wasn't a student who didn't recognize her. A few hours later, the carriages came to a halt. This was their designated camp for the night. Thankfully, this time, they had stopped at an abandoned castle to use as shelter. They gathered in the castle's dining hall to sleep. Each carriage group formed its own unit, led by a knight. As they entered the dining hall, the students curiously examined the ruins. The castle was in shambles, stone pieces scattered everywhere, with gaping holes in the walls and ceiling. "What happened here?" Gary asked aloud. The knight escorting them answered, "This is the result of one of our wars with the Gala Kingdom. We would still be fighting today, if not for the Shadow Plague." "What do you mean?" Gary pressed. Slivia couldn't hold back and explained, "Once the kingdoms learned the nature of the Shadow Plague, they signed a truce. Although temporary, we've agreed to team up against our common enemy." The students, exhausted from the journey, were relieved to be indoors and quickly settled in for the night. This time, the guards took shifts atop one of the castle's towers, allowing them a better field of view to watch for approaching threats. Ray saw no need to use dragon eyes tonight. Instead, he found a gap in the wall and slipped out. He planned to head to the nearby forest to hunt magical beasts. Just as he stepped outside, he felt someone tugging on his sleeve. "Where are you going at this time of night?" Slivia was gripping his arm. "To hunt beasts." He saw no reason to hide it. He might be a student at Avrian Academy in name, but ultimately he lived by his own rules. "Are you mad? You may be able to defeat basic tier beasts, but what if you run into an intermediate tier? The knights won't be there to save you." Her eyes were wide with shock. "Don't worry, I've already defeated a few." With that, Ray twisted his arm free and sprinted toward the nearest woods. Upon entering the forest, he confirmed they were still in Fang Boar territory. He summoned Noir, who remained the same small wolf cub as before. Ray was pleased. They were still in an ideal hunting ground. The Fang Boars were slow, making them perfect targets for Noir to train against. They found a lone Fang Boar. Ray commanded Noir to attack, while keeping his hand on the hilt of his sword in case something went wrong. The boar was twice Noir's size, but that didn't matter. The cub was too fast. Noir bit the boar's legs multiple times, slowing it down further, then ended the fight with a decisive bite to its neck. "Basic tier crystal obtained, one. Would you like to absorb?" "Yes, no." Ray grinned. This was great news. It meant he didn't have to personally kill a beast to obtain its crystal. Noir's kills counted as his own. This was precisely why he wanted Noir to fight. He needed to understand how the system worked. He fed the crystal to Noir, boosting the cub's strength by 8 points, bringing its total to 13. They continued their hunt, targeting isolated Fang Boars to test whether the crystals truly enhanced Noir's abilities. With each crystal absorbed, Noir's fighting skills noticeably improved. However, after a while, the Fang Boars stopped dropping crystals, just like the wolves and monkeys in the Black Forest had before. Noir's points had reached a total of 32. With his experiment a success and nothing more to gain from the wild boars, Ray decided it was time to head back to camp. Before arriving at the castle, Ray put Noir away. Although magical beasts as pets were common among mages, knights lacked the ability to tame them. After sneaking back into the castle, he laid down to rest. He was surprised that Slivia hadn't reported his disappearance to the guards. Then again, humans only cared about themselves. If it didn't affect her, there was no need to get involved. As usual, the sound of 2 pots banging together woke them up. They resumed their journey in the carriage, but this time, Ray noticed frequent stares from one of their companions. "Hey, is it just me, or is Slivia looking at you a lot?" Gary asked. "Isn't it usual for people to stare at me?" Ray replied, unfazed by the attention his red hair often attracted. "Yeah, but you're not the only one with red hair, and she was even looking at you when we were packing away." Ray shrugged, indifferent. Most likely, she was watching him because of the previous night's events. When Ray first arrived at Rennie Town, for other red-haired students had also been assigned private tutors and special guards. Perhaps the kingdom believed in the so-called curse and wanted to keep them in check. As night fell on the 3rd day, they set up camp again. This time, the conditions were worse. They were surrounded by swamp, and the group moved to a nearby hill for a better vantage point. Complaints arose, mostly from the nobles, about the smell, the filth, and the discomfort, while others, accustomed to hard labor, endured it in silence. Ray, on the other hand, was pleased by the change in terrain. A new environment meant a variety of magical beasts, and he had already gathered all he could from the fang boars. As the sun set and the moon rose, he left the hunt. Just before he departed, he caught Slivia watching him again. He chose to ignore it. She hadn't said anything last time, and he doubted she would this time either. Entering the swamp, he summoned Noir, and the two began their hunt. With both of them working together, they gathered crystals at double the pace. Among the creatures they encountered were sharp worms. The sharp worms were human-sized but lacked limbs. Their greatest weapon was their massive, razor-sharp teeth, which they used to swallow their victims whole before grinding them up. Though powerful, sharp worms were slow. With dragon eyes activated and Ray's superior speed, they stood no chance. Further into the swamp, he discovered a fally hornet's nest. However, sensing an intermediate beast inside, he decided against engaging. The problem wasn't the beast itself, but the sheer number of hornets swarming around the nest. Tonight's hunt was a jackpot. The swamp was teeming with creatures, and Ray lost track of time in his excitement. When he finally looked up, dawn was just an hour away. Before returning to camp, he decided to feed all the collected crystals to Noir. As the numbers climbed, his excitement grew. 36, 48, 69, 82, 94, and finally 100. A message appeared before him. Pet Noir has reached the maximum amount of points. Would you like to evolve Noir into an intermediate beast? Yes, no. Though half expecting this result, he was still taken aback. He immediately selected yes. Please select evolution. Ray's jaw nearly hit the floor. He had never learned about this in school. Magical beasts had evolution branches. If not for the system, would Noir have chosen its evolution naturally? Or did the environment influence how a beast evolved? As a dragon, Ray had never experienced evolution. His kind was born at the top of the food chain. But now he was faced with a choice. Two options appeared. Option Horn Wolf, a wolf with a black horn on its forehead. Although not physically strong, it excels in speed and has a slight resistance to elemental attacks. Option B, Blackened Wolf, a massive wolf capable of growing up to 8 meters tall. Its main strength lies in brute force, particularly in its claws. It can also be used as a mount, but is weak to elemental attacks. Option B resembled the wolf he had fought alongside Gary in the forest. The idea of a mount was tempting. A wolf was faster than a horse and could outrun even higher-tier beasts. However, its sheer size made it difficult to keep a low profile. On the other hand, Option A, while seemingly weaker, left more room for future growth. At lower tiers, there were few elemental-based creatures to worry about. In the end, he chose Option A. The moment he selected it, Noir vanished, retreating into his mind. He tried summoning Noir again, but an error message appeared. Noir is in the middle of evolution. A message will be received once evolution is complete. With no way to speed up the process, all Ray could do was wait. The sun was rising. Soon, everyone would wake up. He sprinted back to camp as fast as he could. As the sun began to rise, Ray knew he had to rush back to camp before anyone noticed his absence. Moving swiftly through the swamp, he relied on his dragon eye skill to find the best path, identifying solid footholds that allowed him to move faster. He arrived at camp just in time, slipping into his tent moments before the first light of dawn. He barely had time to close his eyes when, bang, bang, rise and shine, you lazy bumps. Time to get moving. Lannon's voice rang through the camp. Ray's eyelids felt like they were made of lead, dark circles forming under his eyes. He had barely gotten any rest after a full night of hunting. Meanwhile, Gary stretched his arms, looking as though he'd had the best sleep of his life. The sight annoyed Ray more than he expected. Whoa, what happened to you? Did you see a ghost or something? Gary asked, noticing Ray's bloodshot eyes. I couldn't sleep last night, Ray muttered. The group packed up their belongings and resumed their journey through the swamp. The narrow dirt and gravel path barely accommodated the carriages, and swamp water loomed on either side. While riding, Ray kept nodding in and out of sleep. The rough terrain made it impossible to rest properly, but for a short stretch, the road smoothed out and he managed to drift off. Suddenly, Lannon's voice shattered his brief reprieve. "Prepare for battle. We are under attack." The students scrambled out of the carriages and into the swamp, forming a defensive circle with their backs against the vehicles. The murky water reached the tops of their boots, slowing their movements, an advantage for whatever was lurking beneath the surface. Ray scanned the group. Some students trembled in fear, likely never having fought a magical beast before. Others were eager, ready to prove themselves before the knights and Wilfred. Wilfred himself remained composed, positioning himself toward the center to oversee the battle. Ray, however, felt nothing but exhaustion. After a whole night of hunting, staying awake was a struggle. Activating Dragon Eyes, Ray quickly assessed their opponents. Basic tier creatures. Not worth his time. He sheathed his sword and turned toward the carriage. "What are you doing?" "We need to stay in formation," a student shouted. "They're just basic tier beasts. You don't need my help." Ray leaned against the carriage, observing the fight. Much like Wilfred. "Leave him be. Someone like that will only earn a red sash," one of the knights scoffed. "Maybe he's just scared," another added. Movement rippled through the water, but the creatures remained hidden until one suddenly burst out, flying straight toward Gary's face. A sharpworm. Around 100 of them had surrounded the group. Gary tightened his grip on his sword and swung. In a single strike, the worm was split in two. Another lunged at him, but he stepped back and delivered a horizontal slash, cleaving it apart with precision. "Did you see that? He took it down in one hit." "He barely moved. Maybe he'll become a white sash," one knight mused. Meanwhile, the other students struggled. Many hesitated, blocking instead of striking, giving the worms a chance to latch onto their weapons with razor-sharp teeth. Some weapons broke, while others were yanked away, leaving their wielders defenseless. The knights stepped in whenever a student was overwhelmed, ensuring no one was seriously harmed. Wilfred remained watchful, evaluating each student's performance. 3 students in particular caught his attention. The first was Gary, who fought on instinct, targeting the worm's critical points. Despite lacking Ray's dragon eyes, his natural talent was undeniable. The second was Slivia Hart. Unlike Gary, she fought methodically, observing the worm's movements and patterns. She carefully kited her enemies, striking only when necessary. Though her attacks weren't powerful, her cautious approach left her unscathed. The third was a muscular student with long red hair, one Ray recognized but hadn't known by name. He fought with brute force, sometimes tearing the worms apart with his bare hands. More impressively, he looked out for those around him, intervening when a fellow student was in danger and even taking hits on their behalf. Yet his iron-like resilience made it seem as if he barely felt the damage. Wilfred continued to observe these 3 closely, occasionally glancing at Ray, who responded with nothing but a yawn. Wilfred simply shook his head in disappointment. Ray didn't care. He had no interest in impressing anyone. He was at Avrian Academy for himself, to get stronger and uncover the truths of the world. What others thought of him was irrelevant. After 30 minutes, the worms were defeated. The students returned to the carriages with minor injuries, some casting glares at Ray as they passed. "Didn't feel like joining in?" Gary asked. "I was too tired. Besides, you had the knights to protect you if anything went wrong." Ray stretched as he settled onto a wooden bench inside the carriage. As the journey resumed, the other students couldn't stop talking about the Big Three, the nickname they had given Gary, Slivia, and the red-haired student, Ian. They speculated that the 3 were destined to become white sash squires, marveling at their fighting techniques. Gary, overhearing the conversation, turned red with embarrassment, while Ray remained puzzled by one question. What the hell is a white sash squire? The students couldn't stop talking about what color sashes they might receive. The discussion was relentless, and it was beginning to wear on Ray's patience. He had no idea what they were talking about, and the constant speculation was driving him crazy. Their journey had taken them to a vast expanse of open land, where fields of tall grass stretched as far as the eye could see. They set up camp near what appeared to be a wheat field, lighting a fire as night fell. As usual, the group gathered around the fire. The conversation once again revolved around the big three, the strongest students, and what sashes they would receive. Thankfully, Ray wasn't the only one confused. Another student finally voiced the question that had been nagging at him. What are these sashes you guys keep talking about? One of the knights, escorting them, took the opportunity to explain. The sashes are ranks given to knights. As you all know, squires are the lowest rank of knights, but even among squires, there are divisions. Take me, for example. The knight pulled a sash from beneath his armor. I am a white sash squire, as are all the other knights escorting you. We are considered the top of the squire class, while red squires are at the very bottom. As he spoke, he cast a glance at Ray. A few other students also turned their heads in his direction, their expressions unreadable. Clearly, some of them still held resentment over what had happened earlier that day. This also explained why some students had been murmuring that Ray would end up with a red sash. How are these ranks decided? Another student asked. When we arrive at Avrian Academy, you will undergo a test to determine your abilities. Excitement buzzed among the students at the thought of proving themselves. Gary then asked a more pointed question. What's the actual difference between a red squire and a white squire? Isn't a knight still a knight? The knight nodded. Yes, they are both knights, but the treatment they receive is vastly different. A white squire receives guidance, personal training, and additional rewards. Red squires, on the other hand, are seen as having no potential. They receive only basic training with no mentor. They are left to fend for themselves and are often abandoned by the academy in the eyes of other students. With that explanation, the students retired to their tents for the night. Ray decided to rest as well rather than go hunting. His body was fatigued and needed time to recover. The journey continued for another 3 days. As they drew closer to the kingdom, magical beasts became scarcer, making it more difficult for Ray to hunt. By the time they arrived at their destination, his total points had reached 75. Although he hadn't hit the 100-point goal he had set for himself, he was satisfied. It wouldn't be long before he achieved it. Finally, they arrived at Avrian Academy. The students gazed in awe at the towering stone walls that surrounded the city. They were twice the height of those in Rennie Town, and the city itself was at least 3 times as large. In the heart of the city stood a grand palace, visible even beyond the walls. A massive square banner bearing the Avrian Academy crest, white with 2 wings and a sword down the middle, draped down its front. The entrance to the city was just as grand. The front gate was reinforced with iron bars as thick as 2 men standing side by side. It took 4 knights to turn a massive wheel just to lift it. The sheer size of the gate was impressive, large enough for Ray's former dragon self to pass through with ease. Even as a dragon, Ray wasn't sure if he could have taken down a fortress of this scale. Humans had grown much stronger and more organized over the past 100 years. As the gates lowered to let them in, the students left their carriages behind to be handled by others. A group of knights wearing red sashes took charge of the transport. Wilfred parted from the group, stating that he had a meeting to attend. He wished the students luck on their upcoming assessment before departing. That left Squire Master Lancey to guide them on a tour of the city. The sights were breathtaking. Unlike the villages Ray had seen, which relied on torches and fires for light, this city used magical crystals to illuminate the streets. Every building looked pristine, as though it had been constructed only yesterday. It was almost surreal. The contrast between the village he had grown up in and this city was staggering. It felt as if they belonged to 2 entirely different worlds. How far until we reach Avrian Academy? The student asked. Lancey smirked. We are already here. The entire city is Avrian Academy. Every single person here is a knight. There are no ordinary citizens. Ray glanced around. Now that he thought about it, he hadn't seen a single child in the entire city. Lancey continued. Of course, not all of them are students. Once you graduate, it is mandatory to serve as a knight for 2 years. After that, you are free to do as you wish. Most choose to stay, given the benefits and rewards that come with being a knight. They continued walking as Lancey pointed out various locations, the armory, the library, and other essential areas. Ray mentally noted their positions, particularly the library. He was eager to learn more about his past and the Shadow Plague. As the tour continued, Lancey led them to a quieter part of the city. The atmosphere grew noticeably heavier. The students whispered among themselves as they realized where they had been taken. They were standing in a vast cemetery. Thousands upon thousands of gravestones stretched out before them, an eerie reminder of the Academy's purpose. Lancey continued walking through the field until they reached 5 massive statues positioned at the cemetery's center. "I brought you here today to remind you that we are at war," Lancey said solemnly. "War is not glorious. It is brutal. People die. Loved ones are lost. We fight for those who are still alive." These statues stand in honor of the founders of Avrian Academy. They were known as the legendary Dragon Knights. Ray's eyes narrowed. Dragon Knights? What does that mean? Lancey dismissed the question. "During your time here, you will learn about the history of the Alur Kingdom and Avrian Academy. There is no rush. Now, follow along." The students obeyed, but Ray lingered behind, his gaze fixed on the statues. There was something off about them. The statues depicted knights wearing armor and wielding weapons seemingly crafted from dragon parts, a tail repurposed as a sword, teeth embedded into shields. Though it could have been artistic embellishment, Ray couldn't shake his unease. The idea that his own kind had been used in such a way made his blood boil. Then, as he continued staring at the statues, an unsettling sensation crept over him. Something was wrong. He activated Dragon Eyes. His breath hitched. Beneath one of the statues, deep within the tomb, he could see a flicker of life, a red and yellow presence. Something was alive in there. Ray and the other students had been touring the city with Lancey for hours, and even he was beginning to feel the strain in his legs. "Is that everything now?" one of the students asked miserably. "Of course not. I doubt you'll ever get to see the whole of Avrian Academy," Lancey replied with a smug grin. It was clear he was enjoying himself. "So where are we headed next?" "Your dormitories." The mood instantly lifted. The excitement of seeing where they would be staying quickened everyone's pace as they followed Lancey eagerly. When they finally arrived at their destination, the students stood in awe. Before them stood the grand palace that had been visible even from outside the academy walls. Up close, the sheer scale of it was overwhelming. Lancey made his way to the entrance before turning to face the group, his expression shifting from playful to serious. "We will meet in the dining hall at 2 p.m. sharp. Once everyone has eaten, we will proceed to the training grounds, which are located through the north exit behind the building. Be ready. This is when the assessment begins." "Where is everyone?" a student asked, glancing around. Compared to the bustling city, the school grounds were eerily quiet. The only people in sight were 2 guards wearing white sashes standing at the gate. Ray had expected some sort of welcome ceremony, but there was none. "There's a meeting today between the elders, and most of the knights are out on missions. The other new students are already training for the upcoming assessment." "Other students?" The group exchanged confused glances. Lancey chuckled. "Did you really think you were the only ones? Avrian has many towns that serve as recruitment bases. Rennie Town is just one of them. If we only brought in 50 knights a year, we would have been wiped out long ago." The students began murmuring amongst themselves as they processed the information. Seeing that they were getting distracted, Lancey continued toward the entrance. Approaching the large doors, he gestured to the 2 white-sashed guards. The men struggled, using all their strength to pull open the massive gates. "You want to be a white sash like these guys? Become a guard. Easy job, far away from danger," Lancey commented as he passed them. Inside, the academy's interior was just as grand as its exterior. The walls were lined with famous paintings of knights, mythical beasts, and legendary battles. Grand weapons were displayed throughout the halls, some so massive they hardly seemed usable in combat. They continued their tour until they arrived at a towering red door, at least 3 meters tall. Standing in front of it were two knights clad in sleek black armor that looked both expensive and formidable. Lancey gestured toward the door. Red is the sign of danger. Nothing good has ever come from that color in these lands. Stay clear of this door. As he spoke, his gaze lingered on Ray. Ray clenched his fist, tempted to challenge him then and there, but he refrained. He had no doubts he could defeat Lancey, but the two knights guarding the door were a different story. He had no way of gauging their strength, and it wasn't worth making a scene. "What's down there?" a student asked. "Avrian's prison. It holds the most dangerous criminals in the kingdom. You don't want to get curious and take a peek." Slivia's brows furrowed. "Isn't it a bit reckless to keep such dangerous criminals on the school campus?" Lancey scoffed. "Avrian Academy is the most heavily guarded place in the land, with the strongest knights stationed here. What better place to keep them in check? If you doubt that, you're welcome to try breaking in one day. See how far you get." Slivia bit her tongue, visibly holding back a retort. The tour continued until they arrived at a door labeled Student Accommodation U. Your names are listed on your room doors. There are no room changes, no matter how much you dislike your roommates. This is the army. Get used to it. Your uniforms are laid out on your beds. Good luck, and I'll see you at the training field. With that, Lancey left them. The students entered the accommodation building. It was divided into 6 sections, with each area corresponding to the town they came from. All of Rennie Town's students were housed together. Ray and Gary walked down the hallway, searching for their room. When they finally spotted their names on a door, they were surprised to see something else as well. 8 names were listed. "Looks like we're sharing a room with 6 others," Gary muttered. Even more surprising was that 2 of the names were familiar. Curious, they pushed open the door. Inside were 4 bunk beds, 8 in total. The room was plain, offering little more than the essentials. 2 students were already inside, unpacking their things. One of them was Ian, the muscular redhead who had fought alongside them against the sharpworms. The other was a short boy dressed entirely in black. His long hair covered his eyes, and he barely acknowledged their presence, as if they were invisible to him. Gary, ever the social one, went to greet their new roommates while Ray simply began unpacking his things. Then a sudden scream erupted. "No way. This can't be possible. How could they allow this?" Slivia's voice rang out. She had dropped her bags to the floor, her face burning red. "I'm sharing a room with boys?" she exclaimed, horrified. The entire room turned to stare at her. Gary, completely oblivious to the tension, stepped forward with a bright smile. "Hi, my name's Gary. I look for—" A bag smacked him straight in the face, cutting him off mid-sentence. "Shut up. I'm not staying here." Slivia turned on her heel and stormed out, presumably to find someone who could fix the situation. A few minutes later, she returned, looking utterly defeated. It seemed Lancey had been telling the truth. There was no chance. The students finished unpacking their belongings and began changing into the academy's standard uniform, a black and gray jumpsuit. While the outfit provided little protection, it was light, breathable, and designed for ease of movement. All students were required to use the standard equipment provided by the academy, including weapons and armor. Personal belongings were permitted, but could only be used on missions or special tasks, ensuring that no student gained an unfair advantage through superior gear. Slivia insisted that everyone leave the room while she changed. As Ray stood outside, he noticed something odd. "There are only 5 of us here," he muttered, glancing at the names written on the door. "Yet 2 are missing. I recognize one of the names, but I have no clue who Martha is," Gary added. Just as he spoke, a tall, slender young man with black hair and a wooden staff strapped to his back approached them. "Hey, why are you guys just standing around?" the newcomer asked casually. "You're Dan, right?" Gary responded, "In the flesh. Looks like I'll be staying with you guys. Now, why are we all just loitering out here? Let's head in." Gary grinned and leaned toward Ray. "This will be fun." Then he turned to Dan with a mischievous glint in his eyes. "Oh, there was a big cockroach in there. We were all too scared to go in and get rid of it. You wouldn't mind, would you?" Dan scoffed. "A future knight can't be scared of something like that." A few moments later, Dan emerged from a room sporting a black eye and several lumps on his head. The others burst into laughter. Once Slivia had finished changing, they all returned to the room and took turns introducing themselves. As they spoke about their backgrounds, the conversation soon shifted to the upcoming assessments and the different sashes they could receive. "What sashes are you guys hoping to get?" Dan asked. "I hate to ask this, but what are all the different sashes you can get?" Gary admitted. Everyone in the room shrugged and looked toward Slivia. She sighed, clearly bothered by the fact that she had to explain, but it was evident she also enjoyed the chance to showcase her knowledge. "You guys, didn't you study anything?" "First, you need to understand that the sashes aren't strictly a power ranking system. They're more about potential. If you receive a red sash, it means the academy doesn't see much potential in you, at least not yet. You'll be placed in basic training without any extra classes, giving you free time to discover your strengths on your own." "That doesn't sound too bad," Gary said, considering the option. "Yeah, if you want to be a loser," Dan scoffed. "The red sashes get treated like dirt. They're bullied by the other sashes because everyone knows they don't have the power to fight back." Slivia continued. "On the opposite end, we have the white sash. This means you have incredible potential and will receive lessons from the Master Knights themselves." "What about the other ranks?" Ian asked. "If red is the lowest, then yellow comes next, followed by blue, and then white. These are the standard squire rankings. But there are two exceptions, green and black. Green is given to those who excel at archery. Black is a bit of a mystery. It's rarer than white, and no one really talks about it. So, is black better than white?" Monk finally spoke up. "I wouldn't say that," Slivia mused. "If I had to guess, I'd say black is more like green, specialized rather than broadly ranked. It likely serves a specific purpose, but I don't know what." Gary smirked. "Well, I never thought I'd see the day Slivia Hart didn't know something." Slivia raised her fist, aiming a playful punch at Gary's face. Just as her fist was about to make contact, the door swung open. Lancey stood in the doorway, his voice sharp and authoritative. "Students, you have a few moments to get ready. We will meet in the dining hall for lunch and a short meeting. Afterward, we'll head to the training fields to begin your assessment." With that, he quickly departed to deliver the message to the other dorms. Gary practically leaped into the air, grabbing Ray by the shoulders. "This is it. We're finally going to become knights. Hey, why don't we aim to get white sashes together?" Ray didn't respond, allowing Gary to ride his wave of excitement. He glanced around the room. Some students shared Gary's enthusiasm, while others seemed indifferent, perhaps treating this as just another step in their journey. However, a few had grim expressions, as if their very futures depended on the outcome of the assessment. With everything in place, the group left the room, ready to face whatever awaited them in the trials. Ray entered the grand dining hall with Gary beside him, followed closely by the other students from their dorm. The moment they stepped inside, their eyes were drawn to the magnificent sight before them. The hall was just as extravagant as the rest of the academy, its sheer size giving the impression that it could accommodate the entire student body of Avrian Academy. The dining hall was divided into 6 sections, mirroring the layout of the dormitories. Each section had a flag bearing the name of the respective school. Ray and the others made their way toward the flag labeled Rennie Town. Within the section, the tables were further divided to match their dorm assignments, each seat marked with a student's name. Rennie Town was the first group to arrive, led by a knight who guided them to their assigned seats. As they settled in, the hall remained eerily quiet. Some students were nervous, anticipating the upcoming assessments, while others were too excited to speak. As the other schools began entering, their eyes immediately focused on the students from Rennie Town. More specifically, their attention was drawn to a particular group, those with red hair. It was rare to see individuals with red hair, and yet, in one school alone, there were 5 of them. Look over there. Can you believe they allowed that? I'm glad they're not from our school. Who knows what kind of trouble they bring? Ian, seated at their table, averted his gaze, clearly troubled by the whispered remarks. Ray could see that this affected him deeply. Ian had endured a similar upbringing to his own, but unlike Ray, he hadn't been able to brush off the discrimination so easily. Ray had dealt with it in his own way, and he also had the support of caring parents. Ian, on the other hand, had neither. Despite it all, he remained kind, a gentle giant who wouldn't hurt a fly. Ray placed a hand on Ian's back and spoke reassuringly. Don't worry. If anyone messes with us, I'll make them wish they were never born. Instead of comfort, Ian looked more frightened. Air. Thanks, Ray. Gary, witnessing the exchange, simply shook his head with a sigh. The dining hall was arranged so that all the tables faced the front, where a grand stage stood. 6 ornate chairs, adorned with intricate designs, were positioned at the center of the stage. To the left and right of the stage, 2 massive wooden doors stood closed. Moments later, the doors swung open, and staff members dressed in pristine white uniforms entered, pushing along carts filled with food. They moved swiftly, placing the prepared meals before the students. As the feast began, most of the students picked at their meals nervously. Ray and Gary, however, ate heartily. How can you guys eat like that when we have an assessment coming up? Slivia asked, watching them in disbelief. It's free food, Gary said through a mouthful. Once the meal was finished, the staff efficiently cleared away the dishes. The students sat quietly, waiting for what was to come next. Suddenly, the doors at the front of the hall swung open again, and 3 knights entered. Wilfred, Barbados, and Delbert. The same 3 knights who had escorted Ray and Gary to Rennie Town. The room erupted into murmurs. It's the 3 master knights. I want to be as skilled as Delbert. I hope we get to see their abilities firsthand. The knights stepped onto the stage, positioning themselves at the center. Wilfred took a step forward to address the room. I welcome all new students of Avrian Academy. Today, you will undergo the Squire Assessment. This test has determined a Squire's ranking since the founding of our academy. There will be a total of 5 trials: the Gem of Strength, the Hell of Fire, the Silent Night, the Eye of Accuracy, and the Will of Truth. Each trial will be overseen by a Master Knight, such as myself and those beside me. Do not be discouraged by the rank you receive. Remember, even a red sash squire can one day stand where we do. Each of you has already proven your potential by overcoming the trial at age 5 in your village. I wish you all the best in the assessment ahead. At the conclusion of Wilfred's speech, the room erupted into cheers. Excitement and determination filled the air as students envisioned their future as knights. The squire masters worked quickly to settle the room. Once order was restored, Wilfred moved toward the door at the side of the stage. As he opened it, he bowed deeply to those entering. 6 elders stepped into the hall, each accompanied by a black knight at their side. It was difficult to determine their exact age due to the effects of ki, but their appearances suggested they were in their 60s. Despite their aged features, an overwhelming aura of strength emanated from each of them. Ray instinctively activated his dragon eyes to observe them more closely. A bright white aura radiated from their bodies. The last time he had seen something like this was in his past life, when he was a dragon, moments before being defeated by the Wish. For the first time in a long while, Ray felt a shiver run down his spine. The 6 elders took their seats in the grand chairs without speaking a word, their sharp gazes scanning the room, observing the students. Each one was accompanied by a knight clad in black, their armor gleaming under the dining hall lights. They stood silently, just like the knights outside the red door. Delbert stepped forward once more, introducing the elders to the students. He spoke of their accomplishments, their legendary feats, and how they had risen to their esteemed positions. His speech served as a reminder of what the students could aspire to achieve. Once the introductions were finished, the squire masters began moving through the hall, approaching each table. One by one, they called upon the students and guided them toward the training grounds where the test would take place. The students walked through what seemed to be a mile-long tunnel before finally arriving at the school's training grounds. The passage had only one entrance and exit, the hallway from which they had arrived. The training ground opened into a vast field filled with various training props, wooden training dummies, an archery range, and more. Spectator stands surrounded the entire field, giving it the appearance of a grand coliseum. The stands were fairly full, occupied by many knights who had come to observe the new students' trials. On the far end of the field, opposite the entrance, a long table was set where the 6 elders sat, accompanied by their black knights. The field itself was divided into 5 sections, each overseen by a different master knight. Among them were Wilfred, Barbados, and Delbert, while the other 2 remained unfamiliar. The students gathered near the entrance, all 300 of them waiting nervously. A worker approached with a strange machine containing a glowing crystal. Pressing a few buttons, the servant activated a hologram displaying an overhead view of the training field. A similar machine was placed in front of the elders. "All right," a voice announced. "The first test is the Gem of Strength. You will be called up to the stage one by one." Lancey stepped onto the stage, positioned near a massive black boulder nearly the same size as himself. Students must push the boulder from one side to the other. If you cannot push it, you may use these gauntlets. He gestured to a pair of gauntlets beside him. You will get 2 attempts, one without the gauntlets and one with. The gauntlets have been embedded with magic to enhance your strength. Lancey then demonstrated, pushing the boulder with all his might. Sweat dripped down his face, but after great effort, he managed to roll the boulder to the other side. The students clapped at his demonstration. "Now let's see, who shall go first? Ah, you there. What's your name?" Lancey's finger pointed directly at Ray. "Ray," he answered simply, meeting Lancey's gaze without hesitation. "What a rude knight," Lancey sneered. "You should address those of a higher rank with respect. I only respect those who deserve it." Lancey's face darkened with anger, but he quickly composed himself. "Using my authority as an administrator for this test, I refuse Squire Ray the right to participate. I hope this serves as a lesson for all of you. Respect your superiors." Ray clenched his fists but remained still. Now wasn't the time to act. He hadn't cared much about the test in the first place. In fact, avoiding it played into his plan. If he ended up with a red sash, he'd have more freedom, more time to study, train on his own, and even hunt for beast crystals. If he were placed in the white sash ranking, he'd be forced to take extra classes, leaving him little time to do what he wanted. This outcome meant he wouldn't have to fake his test results. If he had gone first, it would have been difficult to gauge how well others had done. Not knowing the limits of his own strength after absorbing the beast crystals, there was a chance he would have overperformed, attracting too much attention. This way, he remained under the radar. After their exchange, the students exaggerated their responses to Lancey, giving overly respectful replies. Meanwhile, Ray observed how the other knights performed. Most students struggled to move the boulder at all without the gauntlets. Even with them, they barely managed to shift it. Gary was able to push the boulder to the other side, but collapsed in exhaustion afterward. Dan performed slightly better, which was expected given the weight of the staff he carried daily. The standout of the test was Ian. He didn't just push the boulder. He lifted it and carried it across the field, impressing everyone. Slivia managed to push the boulder slightly before needing the gauntlets to finish the task. Monk, on the other hand, barely managed to budge the boulder even with assistance. With the first test concluded, they moved on to the next stage, where Wilfred stood beside a robed figure with his face concealed by a hood. Wilfred stepped forward. "This test is called the Hell of Fire. It will assess your mental willpower and resilience. The mage beside me hails from Roland Academy. Some magical beasts are capable of casting powerful illusions. The mage will use an illusion spell to simulate the experience of being burned alive. Every minute you endure in the real world equals an hour in the illusion. Your results will be determined by how long you last." This time, students were called up in order based on their scores. Since Ray had been denied participation in the previous test, his score was the lowest, making him the last to take the trial. His roommates all performed well, with Slivia achieving the best time. She lasted a full 5 minutes. Most students barely managed a few seconds, while the top performers lasted around a minute. Finally, it was Ray's turn. He stepped onto the stage, planning to last around 20 seconds. He didn't want to stand out, but he also didn't want to place last. A middle-ranking score would give him the best of both worlds. The mage raised his hands over Ray's head, chanting an incantation. Immediately, an image filled Ray's mind. But it wasn't flames. It was a massive red dragon. Ray's heart pounded. He recognized the dragon instantly. It was him, his former self. The vision vanished as quickly as it had appeared. When Ray opened his eyes, the mage had collapsed to the ground, trembling violently. He's cursed. He's cursed by the red dragon's son. The mage shrieked, shaking uncontrollably. Wilfred quickly gestured for nearby knights to escort the man away. The students erupted into hushed murmurs. I knew only bad luck would come of him. But it only happened to him, not the other red-haired students. Does this mean he failed the test? Ray walked off the stage, confused. He turned to Gary. What just happened? I don't know, man, Gary said, shaking his head. The mage placed his hands over you, cast the spell, and after a second, he was on the floor, sweating and freaking out. The only explanation Ray could think of was that the vision he had seen, the image of his past self, had also been seen by the mage. The test had been put on hold while Wilfred went to discuss the situation with the elders. As they waited, the students couldn't help but talk about Ray. It was the exact opposite of what he had hoped for. Instead of avoiding attention, he had become the center of it. You just like to steal my thunder, don't you? Gary said, draping an arm around Ray's shoulder. This is not what I expected. First trouble with Lancey, now this. You just can't help yourself. Wilfred returned, addressing the students. It seems the mage has suffered from mana sickness. The student who was being tested at the time will still receive a score based on how long he lasted under the illusion. However, since the test was interrupted, his score will be lower. Luck is also a real factor in this world. The students murmured amongst themselves. Does this mean he only placed second? The red hair must be extremely unlucky. Looks like the curse might be true. Seems the divine being has destined him for a red sash. The group began moving toward the next test, but Ray had a lingering question. What's mana sickness? He asked Gary. I don't really know, but I know someone who will. Gary started hopping up in the crowd, waving toward Slivia. Slivia, get over here, I got a question. Slivia joined them as they walked. She looked slightly annoyed. Why is it that every time you guys have a question, you come to me? Well, we don't really know anyone here, Gary admitted. Me and Ray kind of kept to ourselves in Rennie Town. But what I do know is that you were always top of the class. The truth was, Gary had plenty of opportunities to make friends back at Rennie Town. But every time he was invited somewhere, he'd ask if he could bring Ray along. When they said no, he turned them down. Eventually, they stopped asking, leaving the two of them outsiders to the rest of the school. Fine, Slivia sighed. I guess you guys wouldn't know because it's more of a mage thing anyway. Mana sickness happens when a mage uses up all their mana. If they try to go past their limit, the mana rebounds inside their body, causing all sorts of strange symptoms. It was a convenient excuse. Clever, even. The mage had cast illusion spells on 300 students, one after another. It was an excuse most of the students would accept without question. Slivia then turned to Gary, pointing a finger at him. I won't lose to you. Then, without waiting for a response, she walked off toward the next test site. Looks like someone's got a rival, Ray said to Gary. Gary chuckled. I only have one rival. They arrived at the third test site, which was surprisingly empty. Standing alone on the platform was a master knight dressed in all black. He wore light equipment and carried 4 daggers around his waist. A scarf covered the lower half of his face, leaving only his sharp eyes visible. This test is called the Silent Night, he announced. Watch me carefully. I will only demonstrate once. Your task is to mimic my movements exactly. The knight began moving in an almost surreal manner. Though the platform was completely flat, his footwork was nearly impossible to track. It was as if he were gliding from one point to another, his movements eerily fluid. The students watched in stunned silence. Most could barely keep track of his steps, let alone imagine replicating them. One by one, they attempted to mimic his technique, but no one succeeded. Even Gary and Slivia struggled. The knight shook his head in disappointment at the lot of them. Ray gave it his best effort, but quickly realized that controlling his body in such a precise way was not his strength. By the end of the test, the knight seemed unimpressed by most, except for 2 students. One of them was Monk. Though he had fumbled through the other tests, it seemed he had finally found his calling. The fourth test site was self-explanatory. In front of them was a small mock village, with archery targets scattered across it. Some are placed on rooftops, others hidden in windows, behind debris, or at moving angles. A female knight stepped forward. She was tall and slender, with long silver hair. The male students erupted in cheers at her appearance, but she silenced them instantly by loosing an arrow that grazed one of their cheeks. This test is called the Eye of Accuracy, she explained. Your goal is to hit as many targets as possible, as quickly as possible. The closer your shot is to the center, the more points you'll earn. You must decide whether speed or accuracy is more important. Ray was excited for this test. With his Dragon Eyes skill, he would be able to see all the hidden targets with ease. Though he had never used a bow before, he didn't think it would be too difficult. The test began. As expected, Ian, Slivia, and Gary performed well. But they were all outmatched by a single student, Martha Woodlock. Something about the name struck a chord with Ray. Even her appearance seemed familiar. Dressed in all green, with long brown hair, she looked like someone he had seen before. But he couldn't quite place where. Finally, it was his turn. Ray approached the table and picked up a bow. He stepped onto the platform, standing over the large X marked on the floor. Before the Master Knight could even give the signal, he activated Dragon Eyes, scanning the area. He quickly mapped out the best order to hit each target in a perfect sequence. "Go," she shouted. Ray pulled an arrow from the quiver, placed it on the bowstring, and drew back with all his strength. Snap! A sharp sound echoed through the test site. Ray looked down in shock. The bowstring had snapped, and the arrow had fallen to the floor. He turned to the knight, uncertain of what to do next. "Luck is also part of the test," she said simply. Ray stepped off the platform, having hit 0 targets. Slivia was deep in thought about what had just happened. She had expected Ray to do well in the test. She even wondered if he was someone special. Anyone who could go out every day and hunt magical beasts had to be skilled. Unless they were lying, but Ray didn't seem like the lying type. And he had even claimed to have hunted an intermediate beast. The thought wouldn't leave her mind, so she decided to find Gary and ask him a few questions. "Hey, Gary, how strong would you say Ray is?" Dan, Ian, and Monk had a habit of sticking together, and when they saw Slivia approach Gary, they followed behind, curious to hear the conversation. "Ray? He's really strong," Gary answered without hesitation. Dan, who had overheard, couldn't help but laugh. "Him? Have you seen the test results? I know he's your friend, but you need to look with your eyes, not your heart." Slivia shot Dan a sharp glare. He quickly fell silent, recalling the previous tension in the dorm. "That's why I wanted to ask you, Gary," she continued. "I thought Ray would do well. What makes you say he's strong?" Gary scratched his head, deep in thought. "It's hard to say. I haven't fought him in a long time. Maybe I can rephrase the question to make it easier for you. If you and Ray fought now, who would win? The last time I fought Ray, I won easily. But you still say he's strong?" Dan interrupted again. "There's something strange about him. I think if I fought him now, I would lose 9 times out of 10, Gary admitted. "When we were kids, I was attacked by an intermediate black wolf. I thought I was going to die that day. Then Ray came along and saved me. You need to make your tales more believable. There aren't even many squires who have trained for a year that could take on an intermediate beast solo," Dan scoffed. It was a reasonable doubt. Most people would find it hard to believe that someone at their age could defeat an intermediate beast. The idea that Ray had done it as a child was outright ridiculous. Most of the group dismissed Gary's words, assuming Ray had exaggerated the story. Perhaps it had just been a large basic tier wolf. But Slivia thought differently. She recalled the night she had caught Ray sneaking out of the castle. He had told her he had defeated an intermediate beast before. She kept this thought to herself, but something else about the test also concerned her. A mage from Roland Academy would know their limits well during an exam. It was hard to believe they would make a mistake and cause magic sickness. And with the bow, if a human tried to break a bowstring using pure strength, it would be nearly impossible. She couldn't shake the feeling that Ray had just been unlucky. Ray leaned against the wall, lost in his own thoughts. "I must be unlucky," he thought to himself. Though a little disheartened, he reminded himself that the rank he received after the test didn't matter. It was just a shame that he hadn't been able to showcase his skills in at least one of the trials. The amount of strength he had gained after absorbing the beast crystals had surprised even him. In his haste to shoot quickly, he had pulled too hard, breaking the bowstring. The final testing area was led by Delbert. His stage was almost bare, just him and a sword. It wasn't his usual sword. This one had a different design. Embedded in the hilt was a red gemstone. "This is the final test, called the Will of Truth," Delbert announced. "This test is about ki. Though most of you may not have learned to control your ki yet, it exists within all of you. This test is about willpower." Delbert raised the sword for everyone to see. This sword was crafted using a super-tier beast crystal from the Firebird. As he spoke, flames erupted along the blade. When this sword touches you, it will react to your ki, drawing power from it. Your task is to use your will to subdue the flames. Delbert demonstrated several times, showing how, upon contact, flames would flare up along the sword. The objective was to suppress the flames using sheer willpower. Most students performed well. The most talented among them managed to extinguish the flames entirely, while others at least dimmed them. Compared to the previous trials, this task seemed relatively simple. Then it was Ray's turn. He stepped forward, once again last in line, having failed to show anything in the previous tests. He grasped the hilt of the sword, and then something strange happened. "You have obtained a super-tier beast crystal. Would you like to absorb?" "Yes, no." A system message appeared before him, stating that he had obtained the crystal. He quickly dismissed it, realizing there was a bigger issue. Nothing was happening. Ray held the sword with both hands, yet no flames appeared. The blade remained dormant, failing to react to his ki at all. He turned toward Delbert. "I think it's broken." Delbert's expression darkened. "Don't be a fool. This is a super-tier beast weapon. It reacts even to the smallest amount of ki. Give it to me." Ray handed over the sword. The moment Delbert grasped it, his eyes widened in shock. He tried stimulating his ki, but no flames emerged. "What have you done?" Delbert roared. "This is a treasure of the Allure Kingdom. You were watching me the whole time." "I didn't do anything," Ray said calmly. In truth, he was pleased. He didn't know why the system had allowed him to take the super crystal, but he had just obtained a priceless treasure for free. Delbert's fury boiled over, and for a moment, it looked like he might strike Ray with the very sword in his hands. But before he could act, Wilfred, who had been monitoring the test from the viewing platform, approached the fifth test site. The two whispered briefly before ending the test without further incident. Wilfred then addressed the students. "You have all done well in today's test. I am proud that you will become Knights of Avrian Academy. Please return to your rooms until you are called to the dining hall. You will receive your obtained rank before dinner and then be sent to the appropriate training locations." As they made their way back to their rooms, Gary suddenly pulled Ray aside, whispering in his ear, "Hey, Ray, do me a favor. Before we go back, wait for me on the roof of our dormitory." Gary rarely asked for favors, so Ray nodded in agreement. Whatever this was about, it seemed important. Gary rushed ahead of the others to meet him there. Instead of returning to his room, Ray climbed to the roof as instructed. Strangely, when he arrived, there was no sign of Gary. It was odd, considering Gary had run ahead. He should have arrived first. Ray wandered to the edge of the roof, taking in the view. The city stretched before him, its tiny lights glowing in the dark. Once, flames from torches would have dotted the streets, but now, bright crystal-powered lights illuminated the cityscape. To his right, he could see the towering structure at the heart of Avrian Academy, standing at least 100 meters taller than the dormitory. One day, he'd have to climb up there and take in a view. If there was one thing he missed, it was the ability to fly. The sky had once been his domain, offering a vantage point no human could match. Still, the beauty of the night was something he could appreciate even now. A door creaked behind him, followed by a soft thud. Gary had finally arrived, holding two wooden training swords in his hands. "Hey, what are those for?" Ray asked, stepping forward. Gary's face was serious, an expression Ray hadn't seen in a long time. "You know, today Slivia asked me a question," Gary said. "She asked who was stronger, me or you. Do you know what I told her? We haven't fought in a long time. I said you, but that was just a guess. Since coming to Avery Academy, everyone's called me a genius. If I'm a genius, then what does that make you?" Gary tossed one of the wooden swords toward Ray, who caught it effortlessly, still unsure where this was going. "I'm not an idiot. I knew I'd probably get a white sash tonight, and you'd most likely get red. That meant we might never get another chance like this. So I ask you, fight me." Gary's intensity was hard to ignore. Even if Ray had wanted to refuse, he knew he couldn't. Besides, he wanted to fight Gary just as much. He needed to know how far he had come since that day on the hill. Gripping the sword, Ray met Gary's gaze. If he wanted to fight, he was going to get one. Ray initiated the first attack, dashing forward and bringing his sword down toward Gary's face. Gary blocked the strike, but stumbled back a few feet. A grin spread across his face. "So powerful. You would have easily passed the gem of strength test," Gary said. Gary retaliated with a flurry of strikes, each precise, but not as fast or strong as Ray's. However, his movements were calculated, targeting difficult angles that made Ray shift awkwardly to counter. The fight continued, back and forth, both blocking and dodging with increasing speed. Gary's skill with the sword was undeniable. "Come on," Gary urged. "Show me how you defeated that wolf in the Black Forest. I know this isn't everything you have." Gary was a natural swordsman. Even though Ray's swings were faster and more powerful, Gary could still block and evade. Ray, in contrast, was barely hanging on. Ray wanted to win without relying on his beast form. But he could see that Gary was tiring, and if the fight continued, Ray would eventually overpower him. The crystals had given him an unfair advantage. His stamina far surpassed Gary's. If Gary was going to lose, Ray wanted him to lose against his full strength. Clenching the hilt of the wooden sword between his teeth, Ray dropped to all fours. His posture mimicked that of a wild beast. Most people would have laughed at such an animalistic stance, but not Gary. He remained steady, carefully observing every movement. Ray lunged. Gary swung downward, but Ray sidestepped, grabbing Gary's foot and using it to pivot himself behind him. In an instant, he struck Gary in the back with his sword, sending him to his knees. Gary turned toward him with a grin, breathing heavily. "I guess you're still my only rival, Ray." Ray helped him up, and together, they made their way back to the dormitory. When they entered the room, they were met with an unexpected sight. Their roommates were gathered around the table, deep in conversation. But sitting among them was someone new. The girl quickly noticed their arrival, stood, and approached them. "Hi there. I'm your new roommate, Martha." Ray recognized her immediately. She had performed well in the archery test. That explained why her name had been on their room assignment. Yet, there was something oddly familiar about her. "Martha, I don't remember you being at Rennie's school," Gary said. "I wasn't. My mother is one of the leaders of an adventurers guild. They gave me special permission to take the test and place me with you guys since there was space." It clicked. Ray finally understood why she looked so familiar. She bore a striking resemblance to the woman they had met 10 years ago on their way to Rennie Town. That woman had been an adventurer as well. Martha had to be related to her. Before Ray could ask, an announcement echoed through the room, projected by the academy system. "Will all students please make their way to the dining hall?" The awarding of ranks. After finishing their meal in the dining hall, the students were organized into separate groups based on their sash colors. The black sash and white sash students were noticeably fewer in number compared to the other groups. Ray sat with Monk, Gary, and Kyle at their designated table. Even though the trial had concluded, the atmosphere in the room was much like it had been during lunch. Some students were nervous, beads of sweat forming on their brows as they murmured prayers. Others were excited, brimming with anticipation. The dining hall had a warmer ambience now that night had fallen. A grand fireplace at the center stage cast flickering orange flames across the room. The paintings on the walls appeared more vivid, their details sharpened by shifting shadows. The lights around the hall gradually brightened to a warm orange hue activating one by one as the Master Knights stepped onto the stage. Wilfred, Delbert, and Bernardo stood at the front, joined by the other two Master Knights from the trials, the masked knight in black and the female archer. Each knight held a box containing the different colored sashes. Wilfred stepped forward, a box in hand. We will now announce the results of today's assessments. When you hear your name, please come to the stage to receive your sash from one of the Master Knights. One by one, students are called forward. They approached the stage, where they were handed sashes of solid colors, each easy to distinguish from the others. Their reactions varied. Some shouted with joy upon receiving a white sash, while others looked crushed, unable to contain their disappointment. One boy openly wept after being handed a red sash. The process continued table by table until it was Ray's group's turn. Ian and Slivia received white sashes, as expected based on their stellar performances in the trial. Dan was awarded a blue sash, looking slightly disappointed, while Martha beamed as she accepted her green sash. Monk walked toward the stage stiffly, his nervousness evident. Ray understood why. Like him, Monk had struggled in most aspects of the test, aside from one. A red sash seemed inevitable. Yet, to everyone's surprise, Monk was given a black sash. Excitement lit up his face as he quickly bowed and hurried off stage. A murmur spread through the hall. Monk was the first student so far to receive a black sash. When Gary's name was called, he strode up confidently. His performance had been unmatched throughout the trials, and there wasn't a doubt in anyone's mind that he deserved a white sash. But as he reached the stage, Gary was also handed a black sash. He stared at it in disbelief, unmoving. Seconds passed before he snapped out of his daze, accepted the sash, and bowed to the Master Knight before leaving the stage. Then, Ray's name was called. He expected to receive a red sash and didn't particularly care, as it aligned with his original plan. But when he stepped onto the stage, Bernardo, who had been distributing red sashes, remained still. Instead, the masked knight in black stepped forward, presenting Ray with a black sash. Ray accepted it without hesitation and quickly left the stage. With the distribution complete, the celebratory meal began. The feast was grand, featuring high-quality dishes prepared with the finest ingredients. Ray had never eaten such exquisite food before. As they sat at their table, most of the group engaged in cheerful conversation, except for Gary, who seemed subdued. Eventually, he spoke. "Why do we receive black sashes? What does this mean?" The table fell silent. Gary was clearly troubled by the outcome, and no one had an answer for him. Black was an unusual sash color, and its significance was unclear. Was it good? Bad? No one knew. Gary had been the highest-performing student, while Ray and Monk had ranked among the lowest, yet all three had been assigned the same sash. It made no sense. Slivia was the first to break the silence. I tried asking a second-year student who also wore a black sash, but he wouldn't tell me anything about it. He was fine talking about other things, but when it came to the sash, he avoided the topic completely. "Maybe we're special," Monk suggested. His usual shyness had faded since receiving his sash, and he was speaking more freely with the group. There have been cases of knights changing their rank later on, so I wouldn't worry too much, Slivia added, as if trying to reassure Gary. Gary glanced at Ray, then let out a small chuckle. "Looks like we'll be training together after all." Ray offered a slight smile, but remained quiet. He was just as unsettled as Gary. His original plan had been to receive a low-rank sash, allowing him more freedom and keeping him away from the scrutiny of the Master Knights. Instead, he had been given black, a color no one seemed to understand. Out of 300 students, only 4 had received black sashes. 30 had been given green. 10 had received white. The rest were scattered among other colors. It was clear now, black was the rarest of them all, and its meaning remained a mystery. After finishing their meal in the dining hall, the students were divided into groups based on their sash colors. Compared to the other groups, the black sash and white sash students were noticeably fewer in number. Ray joined Monk and Gary, noticing another student standing with them. The fourth student also wore a black sash. Ray had seen him before, recognizing him as one of the boys from Rennie Town, but he hadn't bothered to learn his name until now. His name was Kyle. He was an energetic, bald-headed student, but what stood out most were his eyebrows, a striking shade of red. Judging by his age and the visible stubble on his head, it seemed Kyle shaved his hair rather than being naturally bald. Each of the Master Knights led their respective students to training areas designated for their color ranks. The black sash students were under the guidance of a knight dressed in black. As they walked through the academy halls, the Master Knight remained silent, offering no explanation of where they were headed. Kyle fidgeted the entire way, clearly itching to speak. He hesitated several times before finally taking a deep breath and blurting out his question. Sir, Master Knight, what should we call you?" The knight abruptly stopped. A long silence followed. Sweat trickled down the faces of the other three as if Kyle had made a grave mistake. "You can call me Kay," the knight finally responded. Without further comment, Kay resumed walking, and the students followed. Unlike the other groups, their path led them outside the academy grounds. The moon shone brightly above, and the distant howls of magical beasts echoed in the night. Monk and Kyle visibly tensed at the sounds. "The magical beasts reside in the nearby caves," Kay said. "On nights of the full moon, their powers increase. On rare occasions, they have been known to enter the city, so remain vigilant." Kyle and Monk gulped audibly, their bodies stiff with fear. Ray could almost hear their heartbeats pounding in their chests. "Have you ever been to the caves?" Ray asked, thinking they might be a good place to hunt. "While you are free to leave the city in your spare time," Kay replied, "I would not recommend hunting there, unless you have a death wish." Ray narrowed his eyes slightly. Kay seemed to know exactly what he was thinking. There was something unsettling about the night, not overtly threatening, but not entirely safe either. Normally, Ray could read a person's intentions upon meeting them, but Kay was different. Even with the other Master Knights, Ray had been able to discern something about them. But Kay was the first person he couldn't read. The uncertainty sent a small chill down his spine. Up ahead, a mansion-like structure loomed in the darkness. The building appeared abandoned, its exterior weathered by time. As they approached, a tall figure emerged from within, the dim lighting making their features difficult to discern. Monk and Kyle instinctively stepped back, fear evident in their faces. Gary rested his hand on the hilt of his weapon, ready to strike at a moment's notice. "Greetings, Sir Kay," the figure spoke. "Same to you, Sir Delbert," Kay responded. As the figure stepped into the light, his identity became clear: Knight Delbert. He greeted Kay with respect, but when his gaze landed on Ray, his expression darkened into a scowl. "You think you're special, don't you, Ray?" Delbert sneered. Ray was taken aback by the sudden hostility. Delbert had never been friendly, but to openly display such contempt in front of another knight and students was unexpected. Delbert stepped closer, his tone seething with disdain. "I know you did something to that sword. If it were up to me, your kind would never be allowed here." His gaze flicked briefly toward Kyle before returning to Ray. Delbert moved in until his face was nearly touching Ray's. Suddenly, a blade appeared between them. Sir Kay had drawn his sword. "May I remind you, Delbert," Kay said coolly, "that Ray is now a black sash squire and is under my protection." Delbert's eyes flickered toward Kay. Avrian Academy will soon realize that the prophecy is wrong. And when that day comes, we'll see who was right. Kay remained expressionless, unmoved by Delbert's words. After a brief standoff, Delbert stepped back, then turned and walked away toward Avrian Academy. "What AD ***K? I didn't know Delbert was like that," Kyle muttered under his breath. It may have been a surprise to Monk and Kyle, but Ray and Gary had seen Delbert's behavior before. "He looked like he had it out for you too," Monk observed. Ray exchanged a glance with Kyle. They both understood why. Delbert harbored an intense hatred toward those with red hair. Gary approached Ray and lowered his voice. "What was that about a prophecy? Do you know anything about it?" Ray shook his head, feigning ignorance. But he had a strong suspicion of what Delbert was referring to. 10 years ago, when knights arrived at their town, Ray had overheard Delbert speaking to Wilfred about a prophecy. At the time, they had found 4 individuals. Later, In Rennie Town, 5 of them, including Ray, have been given special treatment: guards, tutors, and more. The common factor among them was red hair. It wasn't hard to piece together. The Knights had been searching for people with red hair, likely due to the prophecy. But there was a key difference between Ray and the others, one he had noticed from the beginning. The other students had always had red hair. Ray, on the other hand, had been born with black hair. His transformation had come later, a result of his past life. If the prophecy truly sought a red-haired individual, then he wasn't the one they were looking for. They had made a mistake. Sir Kay was the first to approach the mansion doors. He grasped the giant metal ring and pulled. As the doors swung open, a gust of wind rushed out, kicking up dust. Ray instinctively closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, Sir Kay had vanished. Where did he go? Monk asked, glancing around. My eyes were closed, Kyle admitted. They all exchanged looks, equally confused about Sir Kay's sudden disappearance. Well, shall we go in then? Gary said, stepping through the doorway first, unfazed. Inside, the mansion was underwhelming compared to the rest of Avrian City. Unlike the academy buildings, which used crystal-powered lights, the mansion relied on candles, casting dim flickers of light and deep shadows along the walls. It was clear that the upkeep here had been neglected. Ray activated his dragon eyes, scanning the area. He detected several people inside, but for some reason, Sir Kay was nowhere to be seen. What should we do? Monk asked. I think it's best if we wait here, Gary suggested. The worst thing we can do is wander around and get lost. They agreed, deciding to remain by the entrance. It was unlikely Sir Kay would forget about them. Soon after, a knight wearing a red sash entered the room through one of the side doors. Hey, are you guys first years? Black sashes, huh? Well, you're in the right place. Don't worry, he said. Gary took the opportunity to ask a few questions. I thought only black sash knights were allowed here. Yes, but as red sash knights, we sometimes serve as messengers between different departments, the knight explained. Monk leaned toward Ray, whispering, looks like we lucked out. Guess it's true they treat the red knights like crap. Gary turned back to the red sash knight. Do you know anything about the black knights? The knight hesitated for a moment before answering. Well, normally, I wouldn't share this kind of thing, but since you're going to be black sashes anyway, it won't do any harm. There are rumors that the Black Knights are assassins, that they go on secret missions, act as double agents, or are sent to eliminate targets. That can't be true, Gary snapped, looking visibly annoyed. A knight would never do something as dirty as assassination. They fight their foes head-on. The Red Sash Knight gave Gary a knowing look. Even if some people see it as a dirty job, someone has to do it. The kingdom relies on skilled knights for more than just open combat. With the Dark Guilds and the Black Plague threatening the land, warriors with those abilities are needed. Gary remained silent, clenching his fists tightly. Anyway, just stay here. A Squire Master should be down shortly, the Red Sash Knight said before exiting the mansion. As soon as he left, Gary turned to the others, frustration written all over his face. Do you believe what he said? How could Knight do such things? While Gary was clearly disturbed, Monk and Kyle seemed excited. They were relieved they hadn't been selected as Red Sashes and were eager to prove themselves. Humans have always been like this. It's nothing new, Ray muttered. Just then, a knight entered the room. He had short blonde hair and a beard, appearing a few years older than them. He wore a blue sash, distinguished by a single golden ribbon. The knight approached them and introduced himself. Hi there, I'm the Black Squire Master, Joseph. You could just call me Joe. I'll be taking you to your temporary rooms for the night. Training starts bright and early tomorrow. Normally, you'll stay in your usual accommodations, but for tonight, you'll be sleeping here. Joe led them up the mansion stairs. As they walked, Gary couldn't hold back his curiosity. Is it true that the Black Sashes are assassins? Joe's expression didn't change. It's not exactly a job to be proud of, but yes, it's true. We usually only get one new recruit per year. It's remarkable that we've taken in 4 this time. Sir Kay will explain more when the time is right. Gary fell silent, deep in thought. They reached a door marked Blue Squire Knights. Inside, the room was even barer than expected. 8 single beds lined the walls, but there were no desks, no chairs, nothing but the beds and blankets. "I know it's empty, but it's only for one night," Joe said before leaving them. The moment the door shut, Sir Kay suddenly appeared in the room. Kyle, who had just been getting into bed, yelped and tumbled onto the floor, while Monk instinctively pulled his blanket over his face. "Sorry for the scare," Sir Kay said. "I had something urgent to take care of." Gary wasted no time. He walked straight up to Sir Kay, the question burning in his mind. "Is it true that the black sashes are assassins?" "You don't seem too thrilled about the answer," Sir Kay observed. "But yes, it's true. Each of you was chosen because the Master Knights saw something in you, something that would make you a great assassin. Right now, Avrian Academy has a dire need for them." "But I did the best," Gary argued. "I should have become a white sash." Sir Kay's eyes locked onto Gary's. "You certainly impressed all of us. You easily could have been a white sash knight, but we believed your skills were better suited for the black sash." Gary exhaled sharply, his shoulders slumping as he made his way back to his bed, defeated. Sir Kay turned to the rest of them. "Get some rest. Tomorrow, everyone in the academy will begin their training based on their assigned color rank. Afterward, there will be group basic training with all students." Then, his gaze shifted to Ray. "Ray, you'll need to stay behind for additional training after the color training." Before Ray could even ask what it would entail, Sir Kay vanished in a thin air once more, leaving only more questions in his wake. Ray woke to the sharp clanging of metal pots, the sound echoing through the mansion. His sensitive hearing made it even worse than for the others. Standing at the door, Joe banged the pots together, a traditional way to wake new students. "Can you not just wake us up like normal?" Gary groaned. They quickly got out of bed, dressing in their standard academy uniforms before lining up in front of Joe. He inspected each of them, ensuring their gear and sashes were in order. "Good. You're starting to look like real knights now," Joe said. "Unfortunately, I have some bad news. Training has been canceled for today due to an emergency meeting between the Master Knights. You're free to spend the day as you wish." "Can we go outside?" Ray asked. Joe shook his head. "Until you've learned the basics at Avrian Academy, you're not permitted to leave the city. Feel free to visit the library or the church to receive a blessing from the divine being." With a final salute, Joe left. "What are you going to do now, Ray?" Gary asked. "I'm heading to the library. What about you?" Ray wanted to research the Dragon Knights and the divine being, hoping to uncover more information about what lay inside that tomb. While grave robbing was an option, it wasn't something he intended to do on his first free day. "That sounds boring," Gary replied. "I'm going to the training grounds. Maybe I can find someone to spar with." Monk decided to head back to the dorms to catch up with the others, while Kyle followed Gary. That left Ray alone, which suited him just fine. The library was just as grand as the other buildings in Avrian Academy. Standing in its vast halls, he felt like it would take a lifetime to read through all the books stored here. He began his search with books on the Dragon Knights. As the founders of Avrian Academy, there was no shortage of material on them. Skimming through several volumes at random, he found it most focused on how the 5 knights had united to protect the kingdom from the Shadow Plague. According to historical records, the Shadow Plague originated from a distant continent. When it reached the southern lands, it spread rapidly, forcing a truce between kingdoms. The Dragon Knights had led the fight against it, ultimately halting its advance. That had been 50 years ago, and there had been no recorded activity since. Though he learned more about their past, the books contained no details on their weapons or armor, the information he was truly searching for. Then, he came across a book titled The Truth About the Dragon Knights. Unlike the others, this book didn't glorify their deeds or recount their battles. Instead, it focused on the knights themselves, their personalities, their armor, and their weapons. This was exactly what he had been looking for. Settling at a nearby table, Ray studied the book further. One passage, in particular, caught his attention. It described how the Dragon Knights wielded abilities that weren't human-like. Their powers weren't standard magic, but a unique set of skills, abilities thought to belong to the lost age of dragons. Although many assumed they were called Dragon Knights because of their armor and weapons, The book suggested otherwise. It claimed they earned the name due to the techniques they used in combat. Unfortunately, it lacked further details on their abilities. Turning the book over, Ray checked the author's name, Lenny Steele. Lenny Steele, an author known for exaggerating tales of the past, a voice said from his right. Startled, Ray turned to see Slivia seated next to him. He had been too absorbed in the book to notice her presence. He had no idea how long she had been there. What do you mean? He asked. Lenny Steele used to be a knight at Avrian Academy a long time ago, but he quit and became an author to make a living, she explained. Is he still alive? If Ray could find him, he might get real answers about the Dragon Knights. He stopped writing books long ago, so I'm not sure, but maybe Wilfred would know more about him. Do you know if he ever wrote anything on the divine being? Books on the divine being were difficult to find. Writing about it was considered taboo, and most available texts contained only generic, heavily curated stories. Even if he did, I wouldn't use him as a credible source, Slivia said. His books are entertaining theories, but most scholars consider them fantasy. If you want real information, you can always ask me. Ray leaned forward. Then why is the divine being so revered here? People in Avrian City seem more devout than anywhere else I've been. While exploring the city, he had noticed many people ending their conversations with "Bless the divine being." Churches and shrines dedicated to it were everywhere. Slivia nodded. That's because the divine being is said to have given the Dragon Knights their powers. It also guided them to establish Avrian Academy, warning them about the Shadow Plague. Is there any way to see the divine being? If such a thing was possible, perhaps he could ask why he had been turned into a human. The divine being is said to reside in the Allier capital, near Roland Academy. But they don't just let anyone see it. Ray had hoped his trip to the library would provide answers, but instead, it only led to more questions. He continued talking with Slivia, asking her more about what she knew, but her knowledge was limited. Eventually, they left the library together and headed back to the dormitories to rest before training resumed the next day.